When walking past the Chestnut Grove Baptist Church, you come across a modest whitewashed building sitting between the contemporary church and a decrepit slave cemetery. At first glance, most would assume that the schoolhouse was a shed that the church uses for extra storage, if it were not for the giant sign next to it, heralding it as one of the 12 one-room schoolhouses for African Americans in Clark County in the early 1900s. Although the building may seem run down due to the shabby windows and walls on the exterior, the amount of work put into this historic landmark is astounding. Even though the county did not help much with supplying all the necessary items to run a school, the African American farmers in the area contributed all of the school supplies and teachers that were needed to make the school function. This seemingly tattered building was only made possible by the perseverance and diligence of the local black farmers. Despite the fact that they probably had little to no education, they wanted to make sure that their children and grandchildren had greater opportunities than they did. These farmers most likely built Chestnut Grove School with their bare hands in order to ensure that their children would have a better life. While it may be true that the white schools had a surpassing exterior and supplies given by the county, the fact that these farmers were willing to donate everything the school needed shows just how motivated they were to overcome the bonds of racism and create their own school. They chose to ignore the fact that the white schools were given everything they needed by the county and decided that they could provide everything necessary the school needed. While the white schools had many qualified teachers and the students were able to use books that were in good condition, most of the resources that were given to the African American schools were donated, and there was usually one teacher teaching grades 1 through 7. The white schools had multiple floors and had a nice exterior, while the African American schools had only one room and a decaying facade. While no lynchings or angry mobs may have appeared here, this school exemplifies a different type of racism than the one we tend to stress in our history textbooks. This school is a perfect example of how racism was a common practice that was seldomly seen as an unjust institution. A school which is created for the sole purpose of teaching children was forced to be racially segregated due to the intolerance in Clark County. The building lacked interior lighting and indoor plumbing, and heat was given off by a wooden stove. These primitive conditions all made for a poor learning environment for the students inside, who were most likely sweating in the hotter months and freezing in the colder months, which in turn made it more difficult for them to concentrate on what the teacher was saying. These schools also used to be a place of community for the locals, as they would hold picnics and barbecues in or around the schoolhouse. Despite its flaws, this school was a source of pride for the African American community in Clark County. Only 2 of the 14 schools for African Americans in Clark County in 1912 had more than one room. This shows that the white community couldn't care less whether or not the African Americans were educated, so they gave them supplies that were well worn in a building that was falling apart and asked them to consider themselves lucky to be getting an education. As I look at the cars speeding past on the main road that is right next to it, I stop and wonder how many of the people in those cars realize that this building that resembles a shack was at one point a school. I also wonder if they realize all the labor and donations that went behind it to keep the school functioning.